Richmond. And the people who are here, since they were very young, since they were doing their original discernment work, since they came to seminary. In fact, I think the only person here who could say that is me is Bill Sachs, and I'm thrilled that he's here. Before I launch in, I just simply want to observe that Richmond, Virginia has some of the most talented Episcopal priests around. And that would only be true if it didn't have some wonderful parishes. So it's an honor to be here and an honor to be with you. It's also a little intimidating to some of the finest preachers who are also sitting here. Whoops. Beth and I grew up in the same parish in Alexandria, Virginia, just a few miles north, and I've seen a few familiar faces from Alexandria. And in Alexandria, you would go to the parish, the coffee hour, and you'd meet like a mild-mannered guy in a blue blazer, and you'd think nothing of it. And then 3 weeks later, you realize that he was just negotiating food. You just be sort of stirring that. Remember, I guess we still do this. We have that awful creamer, powdered creamer. You would stir it into the coffee, and you would just say, "Oh, I just do some consulting." There's an entire class of Alexandria Episcopalians who have toppled governments and been signed up very obediently for a lemon square at the coffee hour. No one ever says, "I work for the CIA." They say, "I work over the river. I work down the parkway." But every time I come to Richmond, I can still hear the receptionist's voice outside in Peter Lee's office. She'd pick up the phone and she wouldn't say hello. She wouldn't say, "How can I help you?" She would say in her just beautiful, deep, regal southern voice, "The Diocese of Virginia." And then you'd have to figure out what to do. I have a personal stake in your new rector. My father baptized Beth. I recruited her to seminary. But it was the parish of Christ Church and the Diocese of Virginia that has shaped her into her adulthood and into her magnificent priesthood. Not the politics, not the historic spaces. It's the youth ministry. I would like to point out that her youth minister from how many years ago is sitting in the fifth aisle from the back, the indomitable Paige Ford Fisher. If you ever wanted to meet a great youth minister, it's Paige. It was youth councils at convention that said we need to trust a young person's voice. It was Schreimont. If there is one thin, beautiful place in this world that shapes young people and adults alike, it is Reverend. That land, those camps, the hike to the fire tower, Compline after dark, in the stone cathedral, square dances, the same. I looked up the menu. I swear to you, in the same menu. I was like 6 when I started going to Shrine a long time ago. It's the same menu. The saltiest gravy I've ever had. But the mischief of Schreimont, the creaking floors and the squeaking beds and the wooden rockers that could calm even the most anxious soul. Those are the places that formed your new rector. 25 years ago, I remember being in the diocesan convention right before I was ordained, and this bright-eyed teenager comes bouncing up to me, and she says, "Do you remember me? Your father, he baptized me." And I'm not kidding. I'm not overstating this. You know, when you're I was going through the discernment process, and I was a little skeptical of the church by that point, because that discernment process is going to be difficult. I thought, this young woman is so full of hope, and so full of joy, and so full of kindness. I want to watch her. She's the one I'm going to follow. I've watched her grow in ministry, and beyond that smile and that energy, I've watched her do intentional work of leading parishes. I've watched her do extraordinarily quiet, calm, discerning work of pastoral care. And I have watched her become a preacher and a teacher that has not only wisdom, but just incredible intellectual rigor. I would, priests are tough on each other in terms of preaching, so I really don't need this front row to comment on my sermon. We always have a comment on other people's sermons, but when I would be in Washington, I would sneak over to the little parish of St. Michael's and All Angels, and I would be astounded by her preaching. Tiny little parish. And I'd call my dad and I'm like, guess what? I heard the best sermon in the Episcopal Church. So, all that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit this morning about these texts that Beth has chosen, and then simply about your life together. The book of Ruth opens in this kind of unromantic way. Mother-in-law Naomi, she has these sort of fragile legal ties to Bethlehem, but no intermediary that's a male, so she really is a bit lost. She has this tiny little bit of leverage. And then her daughters-in-law, who are Moabite widows, who really have no leverage because they're Moabites, and they might as well go back to their own land because their husbands have died. And Orpah does the logical thing. She goes back to her original land because she possesses no rights. But Ruth does something remarkable. Ruth makes this declaration, and it's not romantic poetry. She says, your people will be my people. Think about the ministry of this place and calling a new rector. That's the line you want. I may not be from here, Beth, but you are my people now. I love you. I'm going to be with you on this journey. That's what Ruth is declaring. From a legal standpoint, both of those women, they were in a lot of trouble. But in some way, because of that declaration, the lack of legal standings prevent the law. From a legal standpoint, this whole act is irrational. But from a theological standpoint, this idea that you are my people now, that is theologically revolutionary. I can't imagine having someone offer themselves with such hope, with such unflinching, devoted loyalty. And that is what you are getting in this next Rector. In the story, the beauty of the story is that Naomi shows us kind of what the logical law can do. But Ruth shows us what love can do when the law is just a little thin and a little broken and a little questionable. The thing that shapes Israel's history and future is actually that act. If you think about it, Ruth, a Moabite, a nothing, because of her loyalty, because of her devotion, because of her willing to kind of really push the law and be devoted to her mother-in-law, she becomes the great-grandmother of David. Israel's most beloved king emerges from that act of devotion. Not from purity and not from power, but from loyalty and mercy that are practiced when the law runs thin. The lesson of all of this is if we limit God's work to what human systems can guarantee, we will miss the future that God is preparing for us. But if devotion to dignity and humanity, the humanity of others, becomes the way we order our lives, then even the smallest and scrappiest moments, even the scrappiest acts of faithfulness will change history. Do you shift to James? Mackenzie couldn't do a better job of advising your mission statement. This is get away from it. I don't think there's much more I can say in this pulpit that hasn't probably been preached about the mission statement. And this, but let me get to just a few things. James is not really just talking about out in the world. He's talking about formation and internal life of our communities. How we take the word seriously, how we speak, how we listen, how we understand ourselves, not as do-gooders, but as people whose lives have been totally reoriented by the word that we claim to believe. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. James knows that exactly how communities unravel, not usually through malice, and they don't. Churches don't unravel because there's some terrible preacher. Churches unravel because they get careless, they get fearful, they get righteous, they don't look after one another. Faith that doesn't shape our instincts around what we say and do is not, it's just sort of incomplete. So years ago, I was running a small, very scrappy school in Hollywood, and I would give a speech to the parents every fall, and it boiled down to this. When your child comes home, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and they have convinced you that their math teacher is so horrible that she's like the moral equivalent of Harry Potter's Professor Umbridge, and you've had this really long day, and as a parent, you've had probably 2 glasses of very mediocre Sauvignon Blanc, and you write an email that is so hot, it could melt the paint off of the fire truck. Stop. Okay? Don't send it to a 26-year-old math teacher. Send it to me. Send it to me. Because what I've always understood about parents is that, for better or for worse, parents operate out of a sense of fear. Will my child be all right? Will they have friends? Will they thrive? And understanding their fear makes you much more patient person. And far more convinced that actually the way we communicate is actually much more important than what we really say. James would call that being very slow to speak. We live in a time where everything in our lives is negotiated through relationships via text and social media, where AI chatbots have become relationship advisors, which is wacky, and where the walls of human connection are so thick at the moment that our lives online push us to misbehave. It pushes us away from one another. So this James piece, I simply offer, be slow to speak, be slow to act, get to know one another. My little school is in a very urban part of Hollywood. One day a chaplain came in and said, there's a man bleeding down the block. And it's 10 in the morning, and it's a very nice, well-dressed crowd. I'm not going to tell you what was really happening. It was pretty ugly. And I asked the chaplain to go get a first aid kit and a bucket of water, and so we went out and cleaned him up, and we tried to get him help. And 2 things went through my head. The first was, I'm really grateful to be in an urban place doing this kind of ministry. But the second was, no one ever can know what we just did. It was too dangerous. When we came back in, much to my dismay, the entire 6th grade class was like plastered to the windows. They wanted to know everything. They had questions, and we explained this is not what they should ever do, but as priests, sometimes your faith just makes you break some of the common sense rules and get messy. And so that night, I just waited for the calls, and I waited for the emails, and I waited for parents to question the sort of modeling of very dangerous behavior, but none came. And months later, I was in a restaurant, and one of our rather slick Hollywood producer fathers, who I really didn't know, came up to me, caroled up to me in a restaurant, and said, "You've really complicated my life." I thought, oh, this is going to be good. And then he said, "My son won't get in the car anymore unless we have water and snacks and gift cards. Every time he sees somebody in need, he makes me pull over and look after him." And then he said, "I'm so proud of him." That's what James is asking us to live out. Be doers of the word, not merely hearers. Because when the word is implanted, it doesn't just change what we believe, it changes how we notice and how we speak and who we are becoming together. Finally, the gospel. As Jesus returns to his disciples after his death, he doesn't begin with correction. I mean, Peter is so ashamed, and there's this back and forth. Do you love me? Do you love me? It's kind of like Golda and Yenta and Fiddler on the Roof. Do you love me? And Jesus just keeps pounding this in and says, no matter how badly you feel about yourself, I am going to love you in your most unlovable moments. St. James, you are God's beloved. You are the people that Beth is going to love in your good moments and in your most unlovable moments, and there will be a lot. And she will love you. And she won't do it because that's rational, and she won't do it because it's the law. She'll do it because she believes in Jesus. And that's what Jesus requires of us. I can say with confidence, this has been handed down by my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather. In parish ministry, and this, sometimes people think, you're oversimplifying it, but if you love the people, if you really love them, you can do absolutely anything in that parish. I know this parish has had a history of love. I've known some of your people in the past from Alexandria. You know how to be loved, and you know how to love right back. And that is going to be what it takes to build the kingdom of God. As the Naomi and Ruth story reminds us, every church has its rules and traditions. And I want to say, just before I end, that in our wonderful Episcopal church, there will be moments when something will be said to Beth or about Beth because she's a woman. Trust me. Yeah. Most of the time it's ridiculous, but it's hard. And I want you to think about this, not because you have daughters or granddaughters, and not because she's a woman, but because she's offered herself so fully to you in this ministry. I want you to get in the way of those comments. I want you to get in the way of that discussion. I want you to help her survive those things. It will happen. She is strong. She is loved. But as a woman, be very thoughtful about that. Second thing I want you to just think about is leading a parish is like holding this balance between the beautiful people and the traditions. And I mean, if you're like Christ Church Alexandria, y'all have pews. And if someone sits in your pew, it's a little bit of a thing. And I have a seat in my church, and I like my seat. And I get it. I get it. But a rector is fighting for the future of the church, too. And so there will be moments where you just need to scoot over a little bit in your pew and be delighted because there's just not enough room not to scoot over in your pew. What a good rector is going to do is help you grow and help you figure out how your mission is really serving the next generation, your children and your grandchildren. And so sometimes that messaging is going to be a little hard or new, and sometimes you're going to kind of push back on it. And if you ask her why she said that, my guess is she's saying because the next generation of people who we need to bring into this church, they are leaving the church because the church is not relevant, it's not talking about anything that's happening in the world, because the church doesn't have the trust of young people. So just be careful and listen in those moments and make sure that there is room for this place to grow. Bishop Lee said in his first sermon to his clergy at his first diocesan convention, he opened with the line, "I will disappoint you." Can you imagine? Like the 80s. And it was this admission that Beth is going to disappoint you. You're going to disappoint Beth. That's just part of this life. But grace is big enough to hold us together. And like Jesus' conversation with Peter, the hardest and most important conversations happen in those ways, and they happen around tables, and you need to keep coming back to the table. And finally, I want to say, and she's going to hate this. She's going to hate this. Beth is kind of the blueprint for the church. She really is. I'm a preacher's kid. It was kind of inevitable with me. Like, this is a young woman. Not a young woman anymore. She was. It's hard. I do too. She is such a product of such a wonderful, healthy church. We have to be bringing about the next generation of young leaders like Beth. We have to do that with intention. The Episcopal Church is weird about discernment. I'm watching somebody who's been on the Commission on Ministry for a long time. They're out there in the pew. We need to stop being so weird about our recruitments. We need to say to young people, this is a great job. This is a wonderful experience. You are the smartest kid in your class. Think about devoting your life, because that's what you have. We need more of this. Finally, the last thing is, if you're not laughing most of the time, the church is so weird and so funny, you're probably missing the point. My hope for you all, I've said a lot, is that in the midst of a moment where it feels like we're being kind of fire hosed with chaos in the world, that I hope this place is constantly pushing to tell the stories of hope, to build families and communities and opportunities where all you do is go out into the world and give people a reason to be hopeful. Because not a lot of other people are doing that right now. If you can do that, if the children that you are raising, if the people that are doing the real work of ministry in this place, if every day they are going out from this place and they are building hope in the world, that is what you're called to do. You have the right person, and she has the right community. I know a few of you. I trust that. You're ready for this. Be generous, be expansive, be thoughtful, be prayerful, and most of all, have some fun. I'm very proud of you, and I'm very proud of your church. I love you.